In 1992, the Philippines not only qualified for the Little League World Series for the first time in history, they won it in convincing fashion. This was the first team sports world championship in Philippines history, and the kids were rewarded with cash prizes from their mayor, local business owners, and received 1 million Filipino pesos from the president. Unfortunately, this team may have been the most blatant cheaters in youth sports history. According to a series of exposés written in a Filipino newspaper, not a single person on this team was eligible to participate, including the coaches. And to this day, they feel that the oldest known players to ever participate in the Little League World Series. But fielding overage players may have been the least serious infraction this team was accused of, because this scandal involved a plan that spanned months, involved government officials, fraud, identity theft, and bribery. Since then, even more cheating has occurred that was so bad the Philippines as a country was banned from Little League, causing a full-out war between the public and the journalists who reported on these accusations, which resulted in death threats, attempts to exile them, powerful people calling for their executions, and one reporter was literally chased out of the country to display the evidence of coordinated cheating, while some to this day believe that this team was innocent, and Little League's decision to strip them of their title was done solely based on a technicality that had nothing to do with cheating, but because racist Little League officials could not stand losing to a small fishing village from the Philippines. Zamboanga City is located on a Filipino island so remote they speak a completely different language than the rest of the country, surrounded by mountains so remote that, according to people in Zamboanga, a Japanese soldier wandered into the city to find out who won World War II in 1990. This city is located in the Philippines, who has never qualified for a World Baseball Classic, hasn't been to the Olympics for baseball once, and has 0 professional baseball leagues. According to the Washington Post, in 1992, there were only 10 Middle Leagues in the entire country. In America, there were over 6,500. Saying the Philippines is not a baseball country is an understatement. It is said that kids play baseball without shoes, use sawed-off tree limb for bats, use miniature soccer balls as baseballs on fields that are used to raise goats and cows. And somehow, in 1992, this small city produced one of the greatest Little League teams of all time. The Little League World Series is a tournament that takes months and starts with over 10,000 teams, making winning the World Series statistically one of the hardest things to do in sports. And perhaps the most surprising part about this team from the Philippines is that their path to the Little League World Series was harder than anyone's. They were representing the Far East region, who going into 1992 had won the Little League World Series 20 times in the past 24 years. And this includes 1974, when Little League banned international competition altogether because the teams from Asia were literally too good. In 1973, Taiwan won the tournament without giving up a single head. The team from the Philippines started with 15 players, all from Zamboanga City. They had to win a district tournament, a divisional tournament, a regional tournament, a national tournament, then a tournament against the best teams in Asia. You would think that a team from a small city who went all the way to the World Series would develop an extremely strong sense of camaraderie, but this is not how it went down. And it was actually these original players, coaches, and parents from Zamboanga who exposed the team for cheating and ruined the legacy of the team forever. Other teams who made it to Williamsport in 1992 were relieved to find out that they would have to face the Philippines instead of Taiwan. But as soon as the teams got to Williamsport and saw the team from the Philippines, they immediately knew that beating them was not going to be easy. Suspicions of cheating were there from day one. A Little League administrator said that he could tell that they were closer to being adults than the typical age of 12 Little Leaguers are supposed to be. Another coach said the team from the Philippines were obviously men, but at least they were smart enough to use Nair. And according to a coach in the Philippines, they were told to remove hair from their lower body before competition to avoid suspicion, saying that the main tool for coaches in the Philippines are tweezers, and that the players often have trouble walking following this practice. But probably the most noticeable red flag about the team from the Philippines were their coaches who instantly raised suspicions when opposing teams realized they were speaking a completely different language than their players. During pool play, Zamboanga City beat Canada and Germany, but then lost to the Dominican Republic, who, just like them, were also under suspicions of cheating. This team was not only from arguably the best baseball city in the world, Santo Domingo, but according to a coach from an American team, they were also composed of players who were obviously meant the Dominican Republic beat Canada 29-0, beat Germany 24-0, and set 12 offensive records. While doing so, the Philippines shocked the Dominican Republic, and despite the Dominicans literally being the best offensive team in Little League World Series history up to that point, the Philippines took a perfect game into the final inning and ended up winning 5-1. Although baseball wasn't exactly its national pastime, this game became a big deal, especially in Zamboanga, where stories of church bombings and local conflicts between Catholics and Muslims were dominating headlines. The people of Zamboanga, local officials, and the Filipino government all saw this as an opportunity to erase all the bad publicity the city and country was getting. And this incentive is what may have led to adults in positions of power to conspire in ways that made this team known for conducting the most intense and extensive cheating scandal in Little League history. But at this point, cheating rumors were confined to players and coaches. To everybody else in the world, the Philippines had a chance to pull off one of the most unexpected feats in sports, and the only team in their way was Long Beach Little League. This team is still considered one of the best Little League teams of all time. They would go on to be the only team from America to win back-to-back World Series and have Little League superstar and future Major Leaguer Sean Burroughs go in 1993 that only became the only U.S. player to ever throw back-to-back no-hitters. He hit 3 home runs in the World Finals to win the championship. The United States thought that since they were playing the Philippines and not Taiwan, Japan, or Korea, that they had an extremely good chance of winning. Until the first inning, when the Philippines leadoff hitter walked and their next hitter hit a home run. Within 3 minutes of the game starting, they were up 2-0 and ended the first inning up 7-0. The game was pretty much over and Long Beach hadn't even had a chance to hit yet. The game ended 15-4, and to show just how dominating this team from the Philippines was, the best pitcher they had for the championship game didn't even pitch because he was sick. The team from the Philippines were days away from an article being released which may have ruined their lives forever. But in the meantime, they returned home and were greeted as heroes. Schools in Zamboanga were canceled and the children and locals lined the streets for miles. The players themselves were given many gifts from many powerful people. Some of them include over $400 each from the mayor of Zamboanga, scholarships to a local computer school, a local congresswoman also gave players a cash reward, and the president of the Philippines himself signed a check to the team for 1 million Filipino pesos, which today is worth about 80,000 US dollars. And unlike how most kids in America would have spent this money, the kids in Zamboanga used this money to buy BMX bikes, cows, and supplies to help their parents with their local shops and farms. And these gifts meant to reward the players in the long run may have been what ruined their legacy forever. 6 days after the championship game, while the players were enjoying parades and gifts, Raider Al Mendoza published an article in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, an article that put his life and the life of several other journalists in serious danger. The article cited several letters written to the paper questioning the ages of several players, claiming that 2 of them were in their 3rd year of high school, competing against 12-year-olds. The letters also accused over half the team of being overage. The article written by Mendoza didn't offer any significant proof. It basically just acknowledged the fact that many people have become very suspicious of the team's eligibility. Nonetheless, it created a domino effect that brought the entire team down, because 2 weeks after the article was published, Little League started their own investigation and officially stripped the Philippines of their title. But Little League did not take away this championship solely because a few players were overage. They discovered a system of cheating, bribery, and fraud organized by officials that was so intense it could probably put some people in jail. The title was given to Long Beach Little League, and during the ceremony to celebrate the team, Al Mendoza, the Raider who originally started the cheating controversy, was literally given the key to the city. This event seriously put his life in danger. Newspapers all across the Philippines painted Mendoza as a traitor. The Manila Chronicle wrote that rats like him deserve to die with disgraceful gravestones. A columnist gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award for treason. A former press secretary for the President of the Philippines publicly stated that Al Mendoza stops where the Philippines begins, essentially calling for him to be exiled. Mendoza did return to the Philippines, but was essentially on the run. He was forced to shelter in his home and did not leave unless he had a bodyguard present. Mendoza seemed to be able to wait out the storm without any violent confrontations, but other journalists in the Philippines were not as lucky, because even though the Philippines had already lost their title, more bombshell articles would continue to drop that exposed the severity of the team's violations even further. But for the time being, the team continued to argue their innocence, and in some respects, they had a lot of good points. Senators in the Philippines promised that they would take the title back, and the Philippines National Organization of Lawyers backed them and threatened to take legal actions. They argued that Little League had taken their title within a month of the championship without a proper investigation, and pointed out that Little League's rules state that in order for a team to be forfeited, a campaign needs to be filed before a game is played. But even though some of the coaches had expressed suspicions of Zamboanga, no complaint was ever filed. They argued that suspicions of overage players in Little League were not new, and teams from Taiwan and the team from the Dominican Republic were constantly being accused of cheating, but investigations never occurred. So why was the team from Zamboanga being singled out? The Little League District Administrator for the Philippines gave up his position in protest, saying that Little League couldn't stand losing to Filipinos, and basically scrounged around for reasons to disqualify them because they were embarrassed. Zamboanga City Little League stated that Americans seek to revise the rules that only serve themselves, establishing their artificial supremacy, and a journalist compared the scandal to the Vietnam War, saying that the Americans cannot prevail, so they declared themselves the press release winners. However, Little League were not the only ones calling for the Philippines to get their title taken away. It was actually the players, parents, and coaches inside Zamboanga who felt like they were the biggest victims of the league's cheating and told their stories to reporters to uncover the full extent of the scandal. 2 months after Little League stripped the Philippines of their title, the Philippine Daily Inquirer began publishing a 6-part expose that covered the entire scandal from its beginning. These articles were more in-depth and offered more evidence than the article that originally started the controversy. It also produced a lot more real-life consequences for the Raiders who were to tell the entire story. The article stated that not a single player on this team was eligible to compete in the World Series. The team from the Philippines started with 15 players, all from Zamboanga City. But after winning the national tournament, only 7 of them were selected to go to the Far East tournament. The other 8 were sent home. According to the Philippines District Administrator, players were sent home because they were afraid to travel so far, and their parents needed their sons home to do farm work, or they didn't understand the significance of the tournament. Under the league rules, teams are allowed to replace their players if needed, but can only replace them with players within their district. The Philippines replaced these 8 players with basically the best 8 players the country had to offer, a country that at the time had 64 million people in it. Long Beach, California has 460,000 people, which is enough people to have 2 separate Little Leagues within the city. In 1992, Long Beach Little League didn't allow a player to travel to Williamsport because he lived 2 blocks out of their assigned boundary. The Philippines had 8 players outside of their boundary to lead as far as 700 miles away. They live on completely different islands and didn't even speak the same language as the players from the original team. It is not clear whether they were taken off the team and replaced by better, ineligible players solely to get a leg up, or because these players genuinely were unable to compete and needed to be replaced. Either way, this was illegal. Player named Florentino helped the team win the national championship. He was selected as one of the 7 players from the original Zamboanga team to represent them in the Far East Regional. Florentino said that Little League officials in the Philippines promised to send the entire team from Zamboanga to the next stage, but did not keep this promise. According to his mother, him and the 6 other players were sent to Manila to train for 2 months before going to China to compete in the Far East Regional. However, after 2 weeks, Florentino turned 13 years old and was sent home. Florentino, just like every other player from Zamboanga, was overaged, but according to his mother, he was sent home because, unlike the rest of the players, she refused to have his name and age illegally changed. This practice of stealing and borrowing identities to qualify for baseball tournaments was a practice that was extremely common in the Philippines. They would simply just use the birth certificate of a younger person from their local area and then pretend to be them while they play baseball. The names you see on the Philippines roster are not the names of the people on the field. These are the names of random children in the Philippines who allowed older players to have their birth certificates. Jamar Alfaro was a 13-year-old kid in Zamboanga. The person playing in the Little League World Series was his cousin, who was actually 16 years old. Ignacio Ramacho was a 12-year-old in Zamboanga who was only in 3rd grade because he kept dropping out of school. His identity was borrowed by a 13-year-old who was the starting pitcher in the Little League final. Marlon Panzo Leon was actually his brother Melvin, who was 14. Expedito Alvarez Jr. is a 12-year-old boy. The person imitating him was 15. Ricardo Marcos and Alan Baton were both 14 years old and already in high school. Everybody else on this team was not from Zamboanga City and shipped in illegally from places up to 700 miles away. But this identity theft did not stop with the players. The players' parents, who traveled to Williamsport to watch their kids play, also adopted the names of parents whose kids had their identities used to avoid suspicion. And the Philippines were likely not the only country who did this, but they were the first to get caught. And this had a lot to do with the rewards the players received when they arrived home. The kids who sacrificed their identities so older players could participate did so because, according to one upset parent, they were promised a financial reward. One parent told the Inquirer that he was given 100 Filipino pesos, a t-shirt, and a pair of shoes for letting the world champions use his son's name, but claimed he was promised up to 1,000 Filipino pesos. The team also replaced their manager. According to the district administrator, this was done because their original manager begged to be replaced before the East Asia Regional for a private matter. But the original manager was able to travel to the Little League World Series, but just to watch, and was not in the dugout. And when Tillen was over, he also came out to expose the corruption of the team, specifically the officials in the capital, who he said added players to the roster solely to increase their chances of beating Taiwan, making it seem like the excuse that players had to be replaced because they couldn't make it to the regionals was false. All the following was exposed in a series of articles written by 3 journalists from the Philippines: Armin Nocum, Carolina Grelos, and Artemio Ingracia. They received many death threats and were basically forced into public hiding. According to Armin Nocum, a high-level member of the Catholic Church went on the radio and called for his hanging. And shortly after that, a father of one of the players from the Little League team chased him out of Manila with a machete. The very next year, the Philippines once again got caught using players out of their district, and the Philippines as a country was banned from Little League competition for the 1993 season. Since then, Little League has cleaned up these types of practices to a very large extent. Teams like Taiwan and the Dominican both face similar consequences, and the type of one-team domination seen in the 70s to the 90s doesn't really happen anymore. In 1992, Zamboanga City Little League became the first Filipino team to win a Little League World Series, and they did it by being one of the most blatant cheaters the sport has ever seen. But to this day, these players, who came from playing on dirt fields with livestock on them, are the only team from the Philippines to make it to winning sport. And for that reason, they will go down in history.